I'm Ron Miscavige. This is Life After Scientology. And of course, that theme you heard was a piece called Jazzalujah. That was on the album I did in 1974 in England. And if you'd like to hear that, you can go to my website, which is therealronmiscavige.com, and go to the music, and the album is called Timeless. You can listen to samples of any of those things right there. And hope you enjoy it. I enjoy doing it. And we have a terrific guest on today who has a really insightful think and inspection and conclusion of some of the datums that, as Scientologists, we kind of just accepted from them from what they were. And this has led many of our audience to think, now, how could you believe something like that? Or what made you stay so long? And what the hell were you thinking about to go so far? So just let me do a little bit of business first, and then we're going to get into it. And you're going to enjoy this guy quite a bit. The business I want to get into is this: Patreon. And all of you know what that is. If you don't, you can go and look it up, or just get on my website and you can see how to become a Patreon. And it's a way for you to contribute to the ongoingness of this show and making it possible for this to continue. Because, as you know, I've mentioned many, many times, I don't have a sponsor. I actually really don't want one, because I don't want anybody telling me what I can or can't do. The whole purpose of this show is to bring people on who've maybe never had a chance to tell their whole story. As an example, in my own case, when I was on 2020, they interviewed me for over 8 hours, and I was on screen for maybe 18 minutes, and they picked the sound bites that they wanted to use to tell their story, which wasn't necessarily my story. So after having that happen to me, I realized this possibly could be happening to a lot of people, but also some people who just wanted to tell their story. That's the reason I started this program. And Patreon is a way for you to contribute to the ongoingness of it. You could donate $2, $10, $100 a month, whatever you'd like, whatever you can afford, whatever you feel you know is not going to hurt your budget in any way or stop you from doing any of the things that you need to do with your money. So if you could do that, I would appreciate it very much. And I can tell you, it's going to turn you from an audience, or maybe being a spectator, into a participant, because this is an important issue that I'm taking up. It's the only reason I'm doing this, to expose the Church of Scientology for the abuses they've done. And as well as that, other cults, which I've had one cult expert on just a little while ago. I'm going to expand it out into that. So that's the business end of it. And if you become a Patreon, I thank you very much for your help and support. Now, without any further words, except a couple, I want to introduce a guy I ran across accidentally by reading one of the blogs on the internet. And he wrote an article on that. And I thought, wow, this is a little different take on it. So I have a few points to bring up with him, and I think you're going to enjoy him. He started in Scientology in 1971. He was on staff in the Sea Organization for a while. And for your further enlightenment, I'd like to introduce Brian Lambert. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Ron. How are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, buddy.
Thank you.
So you're going to have to live up to that intro I gave you.
I'll try my best to try to sound intelligent.
Oh, no. Okay. I know you're going to do it. Anyway, listen, the first one I'd like to take up is this, and we went over some of this. I have some bullet points that we want to cover. And this comes under the heading of the responsibility of leaders. And you mentioned to me that it was the death of conscience. Why don't you get into that?
Oh, well, basically, I did a lot of writing of ideas on Marty's blog when he was a good boy. And it was during my writings there that some of these ideas came about. And I could not stop thinking about your son and the responsibility of leaders, the Bolivar policy that Ron wrote. It's the quintessential document from L. Ron Hubbard that gives characteristics of what a good leader should be like. It's called The Responsibility of Leaders. And in this article, a policy letter that Ron wrote, he also gives the responsibility of the subordinates of a leader, what subordinates should do to a leader. And it kind of blew my mind because here he is, the leader of a religious movement, teaching leadership skills while using violence and murder, rape, child abuse as examples of what a good leader should do and what subordinates should do. Now, some Scientologists say, well, it's just a metaphor. I never really believed Ron when he said that, if a leader should have subordinates under them that are willing to do illegal things but not tell the subordinate. Ron actually says that. He says, if you want to support a leader, and he's really meaning him, Ron, he's talking about himself. Who else is he talking about? He's saying that these people under him should actually do illegal things and not tell the leader. And one of the examples that Ron gives is murder. One of the examples he gives is blackmail. And your son studied this. And what I heard from Marty and from Mike and from other people, that your son used this policy letter as his Bible of how to take control of the church, how to keep control in the church. And I have one idea, because I like getting down to the simple ideas of things. There was one idea that Ron communicated in The Responsibility of Leaders, that his wife meaning Bolivar, which is the story of, basically the whole idea of the responsibility of leaders is a metaphor that Ron uses from a South American leader and how he failed at taking control and being in control of his country. Basically, Ron says that the wife of this leader was missing one trait to protect his husband, and that was ruthlessness. So Ron says in the policy, The Responsibility of Leaders, that ruthlessness is a desirable leadership skill. And you wrote your book about your son. It's called Ruthless. And so I imagine in my mind your son years and years ago as a young boy, after being with L. Ron Hubbard when he was really angry and pissed off during those filmings. Here Ron is yelling and screaming, and here's your young son behind the camera seeing his deity yelling and screaming and thinking, well, maybe that's what messiahs do. They yell and scream. And then he reads Bolivar, or The Responsibility of Leaders, and sees that ruthlessness is an important trait for a leader to have. Ruthlessness means no mercy. Ruthlessness means murderous. Ruthlessness means violent. And so your son, Clay demoed, studied, word cleared the word ruthless. And as a result of that, little by little by little, you start having a death of conscience. Because if your Messiah is teaching you to be a violent person, what starts happening is that within the person, his little voice of conscience starts being attacked. His little voice of conscience starts being numbed. And then at some point, you end up with an OSA GO person who feels that it's their religious duty to harm people and to be ruthless and to destroy. That's what ruthless people do.
Hang on a second. I got a little misunderstanding. Did you say an OSA? What was that word you used?
Oh, I'm sorry. OSA would be Operation, the Scientology GO, Guardian's Office. And it's the OSA is the special operations that harm people.
Affairs. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Go on, Brian.
That's okay. So this one word, ruthless, which is the name of the book about your son, that one word, Clay demoed, demonstrated, studied, trains a person to kill his own conscience. And at some point in time, if that person thinks that there's some spiritual value to being ruthless, then they're going to think that being nice, being kind, being sympathetic, being loyal, being loving is a bad trait. It gets in the way of ruthlessness. You can't be a loving person and be a ruthless person. Your son is a ruthless person. And the GO and the OSA and all the people that are criticizing Mike, these are all ruthless people, and they're ruthless for a reason. They're ruthless because they studied L. Ron Hubbard's policies on critics and enemies. And so that's what I mean by the death of conscience. These people have their conscience has been destroyed. And as a result of that, they act like sociopaths. And so we have sociopathic people that are in Scientology right now. And that's why they have such bad PR. And it all comes from studying the responsibility of leaders. All these people want to be leaders of the planet. They want to lead the world into a world of enlightenment. And so what do? They study this policy letter, the responsibility of leaders. That singular document is the death of conscience.
That's a very interesting take on that. I never quite took it to that extreme. The one point I would have a tendency just to not disagree with you, but the point about murder. In the policy letter, it says pink legs. Do you want to go into that a little bit so we'll know what the audience know what we're talking about? Remember that part?
I do indeed. And basically, Ron is just creating examples of how subordinates should act around a leader. Basically, Ron is saying to the subordinates, please be vicious, because he says that viciousness, at one point he says that it's a brave thing to use vicious people. And so I'm thinking to myself, all right, so L. Ron Hubbard is telling his subordinates that you should choose vicious people to work with you. And he's saying, use vicious people, do illegal things to protect the person in power, but don't tell the person what you're doing. Now, I think Ron said don't tell the person because he wanted an alibi. He wanted his minions to do illegal things to protect him. But if Ron was ever disposed in a court case, he would never know anything about it.
Right.
So he tells his people to do vicious things and harm people. Now, pink legs, it was an example. Ron said that one of his subordinates, he was using this metaphoric story,
right.
that he goes to this leader and this subordinate says, oh, by the way, I killed this woman. Did you see the pink legs over there sticking out? And the leader says, pink legs sticking out? I don't need to know about that. Give the guy a raise. So Ron is basically making the argument that people under you should do illegal, vicious, murderous things and not tell the person in charge that you did that. So that's an instruction. And so that's what we have with the OSA, people that are like the thugs, the Scientology thugs. They are acting like mafia, and they are like mafia. And how did they get like that? They got like that by studying the words of L. Ron Hubbard. There's no mystery to it. The words of L. Ron Hubbard.
I'll tell you, man, as many times as I've read that, I never looked into it from that perspective. I got to tell you that, Brian. But
well, think about it, Ron.
Oh, wait, I don't have to think about it. I'm telling you, you make a good point.
Yeah.
You make a good point. You have to word clear it, and you have to make sure you understand it and, back up, command intention, as they say,
Scientology is a ruthless church, and there's reasons why it is.
Well, I do agree with you. And a part of that ruthlessness, just to keep people locked in, I know that you mentioned that LRA badmouthed many other roads to liberation, any other like roads to spiritual freedom.
Yeah.
Why don't you take that up a little bit right now? I think that fits in with this very nicely.
Well, that was one of my original passions for writing on these blogs, because I've always been involved in spirituality ever since I was 16 years old. I was into it before I got into Scientology. And after I left Scientology, I continued with my meditation and my own spiritual journey. And as a result of going on the blogs and revisiting my Scientology experiences, I realized that there were some things in my consciousness that were kind of like in my way of my own spiritual growth. And what I found was it was Ron. I found Ron was still in my mind after 20, 30 years. And basically, L. Ron Hubbard, being a malignant narcissist, he defined every other spiritual options that people have or potential spiritual refuge that people can have. And he defined them as traps. He defined them as old school. He defined them as being influenced by implants and evil aliens. And he said Buddha was just a keyed out clear. He called Jesus Christ a pedophile. And here is one of the other ones. He called every other saint, sage, prophet, adept, wise man, or wise woman, he called them an inverted eighth dynamic. And I remember reading this and studying this.
I
Inverted,
remember that. I remember that. I had a hell of a time trying to understand that.
yeah. So eighth dynamic means God in Scientology. Inverted, Ron basically created the concept that these people weren't enlightened at all. They were upside down. They were an inverted eighth dynamic. They went out the bottom. So basically, they were not enlightened at all. And here's another word that Ron used to denigrate the lives of wise men throughout the ages. He said they all went up the pole. Do you remember that?
Oh, absolutely remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ron said up the pole. And what that meant was that these guys didn't know what they were doing. They all of a sudden went zip. They went into some transcended state. They didn't know how they got there. They went into some higher state of consciousness, and they didn't know how they got there. They couldn't tell anybody about it. They couldn't teach anybody about it because basically they were spiritual idiots without L. Ron Hubbard's technology of getting them to understand what happened to them. So here Ron denigrates every single enlightened person by saying that they just went up the pole and they didn't know what they were doing. And he defines himself, L. Ron Hubbard, as the only individual to have real spiritual knowledge to help people become spiritually advanced. I found some of these thoughts that were in my mind, in my subconscious,
Wow.
They were a detriment to my spirituality. And so he put down every other path except for his own. And that's why now Scientologists are so arrogant about their technology. They say, oh, we have the real technology to free people. So that's the thing that I would love people to realize, that there is spiritual refuge out there. There are many beautiful spiritual paths out there that are have great effects on changing one's life. So that was one of my passions, was to inspire people to continue looking and to not pay attention to what Ron said, that all of these other paths will lead you to implants, lead you to be stuck in your body, lead you to be stuck forever in some Scientology or eternal damnation. That's just bullshit.
No, I know it is bullshit. And I'll tell you something. These other things are called other practices.
Right.
And if you want to be a Scientologist, you can't do that. It's not that it's recommended not to do it. You can't do it if you want to continue, as they say, up the bridge. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, it happened to me many times. I still had, when I was in Scientology, I still had the eighth dynamic or the God dynamic part of my reality. It still is, very much so. I believe in God. God is a very important aspect of my life. And when I was in Scientology, I actually was getting audited to that my God experience was an implant.
Right.
So, I was being audited that this beautiful dynamic of my relationship with the Supreme Being, with the Creator, was aberrated.
Oh, okay, let me just interrupt you for a second, because I want to add something to this, just to enhance the understanding of our listening audience. When we're talking about dynamics, and many of you may know this, so just bear with me for the people who don't know it. Scientology divides life into 8 different dynamics. And what they mean by that is an urge towards survival. The first one would be an urge to survive as yourself, as your own self. That's the first dynamic. The second dynamic would be the urge to survive from the sex act and family itself and the rearing of children. The third dynamic would be part of groups. Like, I'm a musician, Brian's a musician, we're part of that dynamic. So that's the third dynamic, groups. The fourth dynamic, the urge to survive as all of mankind. And then the fifth dynamic would be the urge to survive as all of life, such as plants, animals, everything that has life in it. The sixth dynamic would be the urge to survive as part of the physical universe. The seventh dynamic would be the urge to survive as a spiritual group, as all spiritual groups. And the eighth dynamic is not called the God dynamic, but we use that just trade-off. It's called infinity. So we refer to that as the God dynamic. But in Scientology, you were taught that you and I, excuse me, maybe you or I did it. We say the other person made the universe. It's saying that we are the creators of this universe. And so there's no God involved in it at all. But that's what the eighth dynamic would represent, just infinity, the ongoing impulse of things to go on forever. I don't know if I made it more complex, but I'm trying to simplify it. So the eighth dynamic is what Brian is talking about, the God dynamic or the infinity dynamic. Okay, right. Brian, go on, if you have something to add to that.
One of the things that happened to me after I left Scientology is I found it difficult to read other philosophies because I had all of these trigger points in my head from studying Ron for 11 years on how elite our understanding was in Scientology, how we were the best. He was the wisest. Scientology had not perfect, but the most workable, which tell me the difference between the two. And I found it difficult to actually study other philosophies because I was so trained in my mind since being so young that Scientology had the only answers. So if there was one thought that I would love to convey to your listeners, that is that concept that Ron taught us all, that he was the only way, that there was no other way to freedom, no other way to spiritual enlightenment, no other way to anything except for him. That, what I think is one of the biggest philosophical crimes that he did to all of our minds was that he single-handedly made less of all other paths to the spirit except his own. And Scientologists believing that create something in their mind, which is like it becomes a block to be able to becoming receptive to other ways of seeing. And it's insidious and it's evil from my perspective.
Well, I'll tell you, I happen to agree with you. And I think you hit it dead on when you said that, because that does contribute to the arrogance of the Scientologists. They're the only ones.
The only ones. And then, which brings me to the other idea. I have deduced two concepts that I think are the most evil in Scientology and in other fundamentalist type of religions as well. That is the doctrine of the only way and eternal damnation. These two are very evil. And may I explain to you what I think about them?
Absolutely. Why? Go ahead. This is your time, man.
Okay. Only way. So let me give you an analogy. Only way is insidious. Let's say you were in a burning house, okay? And you see an open door, and there's a whole bunch of people in this house, and there's this one open door over there. And you think in your mind that that's the only door to free people. And then Harry's downstairs, he sees another door, and he thinks he's trying to help people get out the downstairs door. But you are certain that there are no other ways out. So anybody who tries to get anybody out the downstairs door is going to be considered to potentially kill people. So the only way, the concept of the only way causes people to think that people who are promoting other ways are a danger to people. Because if I have the only way to free people for spiritual freedom, then everybody else is a danger to humanity because they don't have a way. I'm the only one that has a way. So therefore, these people must be an enemy. These people must be evil because they're going to usher all of these people to a fiery death in this house, because I know this is the only door that these people can escape from. So now that that's dangerous. And so the next concept that's really super dangerous is eternal damnation. So basically that means in Scientology, Ron said somewhere that if you don't follow the path of Scientology and do the OT levels, you're going to become like an eternal rock, or you'll become an eternal piece of matter, is what he said. That was Scientology's eternal damnation, is becoming a piece of matter forever and losing your spirituality and using yourself as a thetan. So here we have the only way, only my way is going to work. And then we have eternal damnation for not following the only way. So what it does is it gives people involved in the only way a religious duty to save the world from eternal damnation. And that's why they think that they're doing well.
Yeah.
That's why people in fundamentalist religions, they feel they're doing a good job. And us here out in the world, we look at them and we go, how the hell could they be thinking like this? They're thinking like this because, number one, they agreed that they have the only way.
Yeah.
And that if you don't follow the only way, people are going to be harmed and be eternally punished. That makes a person crazy and a very dangerous person to be around, who expresses the tyranny of good intentions.
Wow. You're a thinker.
Sometimes
Brian,
too much.
these are insightful things.
Thank
You're
you.
so used to the indoctrination that goes on because, you go and study 2.5 hours a day, 5 days a week. It becomes just part of your habit. And slowly you absorb these things and they become part of your personality. And that's the way it happens. Do you agree with that?
Completely. In fact, I'll give you an example right here of how that happens. Okay, so there was a point in time where I started realizing, how did this happen? How did this happen to me? How does this happen to people? And I realized what I can do is I can go back in some of the early books that I read, and I could, in a sense, apply Scientology to undo Scientology. So I went back in time and I read some books and passages that were key ideas for me that made me go, oh, I love Ron. I love Scientology. I'm going to do this because this is what I'm looking for. And I'm going to read this one little short paragraph that Ron wrote in Fundamentals of Thought, which is an introductory book that people always read, Fundamentals of Thought, when they first get into Scientology. And it's a key indoctrination. There are two things that he says here. One, he has this one sentence talking about Scientology. It is a precise and exact science designed for an age of exact sciences. So here L. Ron Hubbard is positioning himself with mathematics, physics, and all of the hard sciences with this one sentence. And then he goes on further to say, and this is the kicker. This was the one that like thwapped the mousetrap right on the neck. Okay, so here's a quote. Tens of thousands of case histories, reports on persons who have been processed, individual records, all sworn to, attested before public officials, are in the possession of the organizations of Scientology. No other subject on earth except physics and chemistry had such grueling testing, proofs, exact findings. Scientology in the hands of an expert auditor can restore man's ability to handle any and all of his problems. Scientology is used by some of the largest companies, business organizations on earth. It is valid. It has been tested. It is the only thoroughly tested system of improving human relations, intelligence, and character, and is the only one which does. I mean,
Wow.
what? So basically,
In other words, Brian, that's an acceptable truth. You know that.
Yeah.
You know what an acceptable truth is?
I do, but I have another name for it since I got out of Scientology. Bullshit.
It's a lie.
It's a lie. Can I say the F word on here?
Yeah, it's all right.
Okay, sorry. From being from New York, it's still up there somewhere, these type of conversations. Okay, so basically for me as a young kid, when I read this, I believed him.
Yeah.
I never met a person in my life that lied to me. I didn't know human beings could be a liar. I never met a congenital liar.
Wait. Let's clarify that you're talking about the art of lying. You don't mean just somebody like a kid. The mom comes in, the cookies jars on the floor, and the kid says, "I didn't do it, Mom." No, it's skillful, artful lying.
Con.
Yeah.
Complete con. So I think that Scientologists, when they're out, I think it's a good idea to go back and to read some of the original books that they read, some of the simple ones, and try to find those points in time when they went, I trust him, because it's those idea moments of trust that we have towards Ron that put us in a vulnerable receptivity to then accept some of the more crazy stuff that he talks about. So if we have beautiful experiences in the beginning in Scientology, some basic experiences. And then we continue to go, well, I trust Ron, I trust Ron. As soon as we say, I trust Ron and he's infallible, you are toast, buddy.
Yeah.
Then you'll start believing that Jesus was a pedophile and love and understanding is a Markhab conspiracy. This is a quote from the OT8 materials.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. And I'll tell you something. Your compassion for your fellow man really goes down. If somebody's down and out, you figure, hey, he's a fucking downstat. Don't help him. He's got to pull himself up by his own bootstraps. Well, let me tell you something. There are times when man does need a hand. There are times when they could stand a little bit of help. As a matter of fact, several programs ago, I mentioned a philosophy that I'd like to introduce, and it's this. I called it a religion, but I don't want it to be called a religion because if you're watching this show or you get enlightened, stick to your own religion. Keep your own counsel. But the 2 points I made of this philosophy were this: help something and help somebody. That's the only 2 points of it. And if you could do those 2 things, I think you'll lead a better life, a more enjoyable life, and actually a more rewarding life, because many of the truths in the Bible and various other religions, it's holier to give than it is to get. I've seen that as being true. I feel much better after I help somebody than somebody helping me. So those are the 2 things. And I don't know what to call it, a philosophy, a movement, or whatever, but just help something, help somebody. And those are things that are alien to a trained Scientologist's mind. They can help you if you pay about $1,000 an hour for auditing, and they think they're helping you, but they're further in, putting you in the trap with that. Anyway, yes, that's my 2 cents on that.
There's reasons for that too, Ron. It's like they were taught to be like that.
Yeah.
It was the words of Ron, which maybe leads us to the next one, the tone scale.
Yeah.
That is the perfect reflection of what you just said. Scientologists have the sympathy aborted from their human characteristic.
Well, I do know this, and you actually, well, of course I've known it, but in prior conversations, this is off the air when we were setting up this interview. And also I saw it in an article you wrote. There is such a thing as an emotional tone scale, which goes from body death all the way up to like spiritual freedom. So the higher up your emotion is, the closer you are to achieving spiritual freedom. And the emotion hate, H-A-T-E, hate, is higher than sympathy. In other words, it's higher toned to hate somebody than it is to give them sympathy. Let's say if they're in need, let's say somebody breaks their arm and they're in pain and you give them a little bit of sympathy, maybe hold their hand or something. That's considered a lower emotional tone. You want to expand on this, Brian, because your article was terrific that I read on it.
Yeah, that one point I've been talking about for a while, and it kind of culminated in the essay for Mike. And in my mind, any teacher that says that sympathy is a lower emotion than hate, that one simple relation that Ron created with the tone scale, the scale being a numerical gradation. Up at the top, it's serenity of beingness, and there's cheerfulness and happiness. And as it goes down to more dense emotions, like fear and blah, blah, blah. So Ron actually made this numerical tone scale of emotions. Down at the bottom is hiding, and up at the top is really happy. But what he does with sympathy and hate, in my view, is he unwittingly reveals to us that he's a sociopath, meaning Ron does not feel when he harms people, which is a characteristic of Scientology. They harm people and there's no feeling because they have no sympathy for the harm that they've done. So if sympathy or caring for the suffering of others or feeling for the suffering of others is lower than hate, then it's okay to hate, and it's okay to be hostile to people, because if they're in pain, and as a Scientologist, you've been educated that having sympathy for that pain is low, you're not going to have that sympathy. There's where, once again, the conscience is starting to become occluded. One's own innate spiritual soul conscience, which we all have, an innate sense of right and wrong. We all have that. L. Ron Hubbard's technology and doctrines slowly boil the frog to where a decent person ends up becoming an indecent person who sees hostility and hate as a positive trait. Look at your son. Look at the emails. Look at the letters that the A&E is getting. You mean they're just hate, constant hate. Look at the Scientology hate sites. In fact, that's what everybody calls them, the Scientology hate sites.
Yeah, you're right. That's very true. Listen, they bought over 500 iterations of my name, which is more than Leah Remini, Mike Rinder, Tom DeVocht, you name it, all of the other people combined. And that's 500 different ways you could put in my name, and they will all take it to a hate side of me.
Well, you know, Ron, what they say, when you're over the target, it's where you start taking flack.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you something.
You are over the target.
I have 2 words of wisdom for them, and they're very well thought out. And I think it'll enlighten them if they would take it to heart. And here it is. I'm going to give it for the first time ever on my program. Fuck you. Need I say anything else? I don't think so. You got it.
I got it.
And while you're thinking about it, why don't you help something and help somebody?
Yeah. You know, I think that's really it. In Scientology, help is a PR campaign.
Yeah, I know.
That's what help is. It's not from the heart. It's from the pocketbook. We want to make ourselves look good.
Yeah.
So we're going to go out there. We're going to help people so that we look good. It's pure selfishness and ego and arrogance.
Yeah. They do a photo shoot, and then once the photo shoot is done, everybody goes home. That's the end of it.
You know, Ron.
Excuse me, that's not the end of it. Then the IAS shows the photos and says, "Please give us your money. Look what we're doing."
Yeah, I feel sorry for them, Ron. You know, sometimes I've had that emotion that you have of "fuck you," and sometimes it's completely deserved. And then there are other times where I realize, you know what? These people trusted L. Ron Hubbard. Yeah. They let L. Ron Hubbard's thoughts go into their brain, into their mind. And I feel sorry for them.
Now, Brian, I'm going to tell you something. I actually do feel sorry for them. You know, I say that just as a little tongue in cheek is, come on, man, come to your senses. For God's sake, look what the hell you're doing. Just think about it. Look in the mirror and look at yourself and say, am I really doing this? And I think I'm helping somebody. I mean, if there's any amount of sense left in your head, you'll say, you know what, I'm getting the hell out of here. And, you know, start watching this program, watch what other people have to say about it, and let those layers of years of indoctrination peel off, and maybe you'll lead a better life. But I actually do pity them, because they are trapped by their own minds, and they got trapped that way by L. Ron Hubbard.
They're trapped by L. Ron Hubbard's mind. And I think that here's another key concept that I believe is destructive to mental independence. And that is, all critics of Scientology are criminals.
Yeah.
I thought about that.
That's a good point. That's a damn good point.
Who actually come? You have to be hypnotized to be able to agree with that concept. You have to be, because L. Ron Hubbard says every single critic of Scientology is a criminal. So now, a Scientologist that actually grants Ron infallibility and allows that concept into their head, they're going to see you, they're going to see me, they're going to see anybody that gives any criticism of Scientology on the same par as Hitler, Mussolini, Pol Pot, Adolf Hitler. We're all, L. Ron Hubbard put free thinkers in the category of world murderers. And so, because we are evil and critics are criminal, the Scientologists can't hear our words, because if they heard our words, if they understood our words, they would start doubting what they've studied, and then they'd start doubting L. Ron Hubbard, and then they'd become an SP themselves, and then they'd lose their family and lose their friends and lose their lives. So it's easier for them to stay in agreement that all critics are bad, evil people.
Yeah.
It's just so stupid. It's just so stupid. Who could even think? Here's another one, Ron. It's like, okay, so Ron says there are no absolutes in the MEST universe, or the material universe. No absolutes at all. Okay, well, critics are in the material universe. How can all critics be criminal? If you think about that, that's such an absurd statement. You have to be brainwashed to agree with that concept. It's just it's so stupid.
No, here, and the thing is this, it comes back to things I've said many times, and I'm sure you have, and Mike Rinder, and maybe even Leah. When you first get in, there are things that you do that seem legitimate and they're helpful. I know this from doing the communication course.
Mm-hmm.
It helped my communication skills. It helped me get along better in life.
Mm-hmm.
But I am not saying that you should do that and join Scientology just to get that. I mean, you can read about communication. And
well, if you ask the mouse, how did the cheese taste? But just before the thwap on the neck, he would probably want, that cheese was pretty damn good.
yeah. That's true. That's true. That's true. But I'm not going to stick my head in that trap again.
I have definitely gained things in Scientology. The communication course, I found it really, really helpful. It was really a beautiful course. There were some beautiful things in Scientology. And how could there not be? Because there's some beautiful things in life. L. Ron Hubbard cannot be totally evil all the time. I really believe he was trying to help himself out of his own suffering. There's no doubt about it. And every now and again, he found some things that were workable, found some things that helped people. I don't doubt that whatsoever, because I experienced it myself. But that's the cheese. But the other thing is, those things that we got from Scientology, all of those things could be had outside of Scientology. And that's the lie. That's the big lie, that you could only get these experiences. Toastmasters. I know somebody that go to Toastmasters, and they give the same wins that Scientologists give, like on EOT levels.
Yeah.
So it's a lie.
Oh, wait a minute. You want to explain what a Toastmaster is? Some people might not know what that is. Please.
Toastmasters is a free organization that trains people on how to talk publicly. And people go there and they're trained. It's free. And they basically just learn how to become public speakers. They overcome their fears. They gain confidence in themselves, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, somebody going to a therapist, somebody going to Toastmasters, somebody talking to their priest, somebody having a good conversation with their mom and dad or friend could have the same wins that somebody that spent $100,000 in the OT levels for.
Exactly right. And I tell you, referring to Toastmasters, I had a friend tell me recently that two of the greatest fears in life are, number one, dying. That's the greatest fear. And the next greatest fear is having to speak to an audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Isn't that wild? So if these people can get over that and speak to an audience, they got to feel pretty damn good.
Yeah. It can sound just like an OT level declaration of a win. I feel so much more confidence myself. My thoughts, when I think a thought and I communicate to people, they really get my ideas now. Well, okay, well, this one was free. The other one cost you like $500,000.
Well, here's another one. I work out regularly, and I've done that since actually my whole life. And I use a specific type of workouts, and they're short. They're very brief. They're pretty intense. They're as intense as I want to make them be. They go anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. And about a minute or two after that, my body starts releasing endorphins. And I feel great. It's almost like, wow.
Like running around a pole.
Yeah. So there you go. What did it cost me? Not a penny.
Yeah.
Not a penny. And, so there's another thing. You can enjoy something so much that you have like a relief at the end, or a feeling of pleasure or sensation of happiness. Don't cost anything. Here, help something, paint your house, make it look beautiful.
And that was Ron's genius. One of Ron's geniuses was, number one, he was supremely articulate. He was very, very articulate.
Oh boy, yeah.
I would call Ron a genius, but I also call him an evil genius.
Yeah.
He was able to convince Scientologists that only he can deliver happiness and true stability.
Yeah.
That was a lie. That was a big lie.
And the other point is help somebody. Go out and give somebody some help today. And
Yeah.
you know what? You're going to feel better.
Yeah.
It'll enhance your life. But listen, before we get too much into this, there was one point I wanted to talk to you about, and we discussed this prior to the program when we were going over what we're going to talk about, and that is the OT levels. And you mentioned about why people feel better or what gains they can get out of doing the OT levels. Do you want to go into that, Brian?
Sure. Um, well, being on the blogs for so many years, I heard so many different perspectives of people saying, well, I got a lot of gain on OT3, or I got a lot of gain on the OT levels. And they were sincere. I mean, how could somebody lie about having a gain? And so I thought, okay, so if people are having gains on the OT levels, yet the OT levels are a lie. In other words, you know, Hawaii did not exist in 75 million years ago. I mean, if you want to get into the OT3 thing, I don't think most people know about OT3 right now. And so if it's a lie and people are having gains, why is that? How is that? And then I remembered my younger brother went to a psychologist. He was getting therapy, and he's a student of Carl Jung and of Joseph Campbell. So the therapy he went to was dream therapy. Dream therapy is that therapy which they use your dreams as an analogy for the realities in your life. So, for instance, if I had a dream about a big monster eating my house, and then the therapist goes, okay, let's talk about that monster eating your house. And then all of a sudden I find, oh, wow, I've been worried about paying my mortgage. So that's what that is. So let's deal with money. So here we have a make-believe dream image having a definite correlation to a reality in one's life. So then I extrapolated that and I thought, that's what's happening on the OT levels. L. Ron Hubbard is creating this story that he thinks is real, and he's giving all these people these moments on the quote unquote time track. And by the time people get to the OT levels, Ron is infallible. So they're accepting any ideas that comes into Ron as completely true. That's just unquestionable. And they're calling it science. So what the OT levels do is he creates this story, a false story that has real emotional and mental energy that gets restimulated in people. So if Ron says something like, okay, you're in this implant and all this electronic stuff is coming at you and it's destroying your mind. And so you're on the cans, you know, and you have your eyes closed and you're thinking about this situation or this implant. And then the mind buys into the drama of this thing is hurting me. I'm feeling pain. So the story's a lie, but the energy is real. So for instance, I give this story on the article. So if I'm sitting in a forest and I'm eating my lunch and I look down on the forest floor and there in the underbrush about a foot away from me is a coiled up snake. So I look down there and I start feeling fear, sweat, you know, and let's say if in that particular forest there deadly snakes are known to be there. So I'm going through this physical phenomena of horrible fear and of death. And so I look down and it's not moving and I poke it with a stick and I realize it's rope. It's a big thick piece of rope that's coiled up that I mistook it for. Okay, so here we have in Eastern philosophy the word Maya, which means delusion. It means seeing the unreal as real. We see the unreal as real. That could be the definition of ignorance. It's just not true. But that unreal snake, which was a piece of rope, created in me a real emotion of fear, a real emotion. So if I was on the e-meter during that moment in time, the e-meter would be jumping around showing that I'm experiencing this horrible experience with a snake. So the meter's saying it's there, but the truth of the matter is it's a rope. And I'm just reacting to an unreality. So the OT levels are an unreality. They're not true because Hawaii didn't exist 75 million years ago. And LRH was on drugs when he was doing OT3 anyway. So, and he was just channeling his own subconscious mind and his own sci-fi tendencies. So people on the OT levels are getting reads that are imagination. It's their own imagination that they're reading. And when they overcome that imagination, then they call that completing an OT level.
Right. Right.
That's my take on it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take. I don't have quite that take, but my take on OT3 was that had to do with the incident that happened 75 million years ago to 75 planets, right?
Yeah.
Around here. And
yes.
The average population was, I think, what, 500 billion per planet?
Something like that.
Tremendous.
But, you know, all of that, though, that's the state.
I could not figure out how you're going to get all those people here in those airplanes that were actually spaceships. And I thought, how could this happen? Logistically, I just didn't think it could happen. But then I dismissed it and accepted it because, you know, it was L. Ron Hubbard telling me, so I have to accept what he says.
Exactly. So it's all an unreality that we are thinking is real, which is the essence of Scientology. Now, to me, the quintessential fact, which says that the OT levels are complete bullshit, is the fact that L. Ron Hubbard sought to commit suicide while he was still running BTs on that ranch. Sarge, who was L. Ron Hubbard's handyman that lived with him towards the end of his life,
right?
L. Ron Hubbard wanted him to create an E-meter with line voltage in it.
Yep.
Hold the cans so that it would kill his body so that he would free BTs. Now, this is after he, quote unquote, wrote OT8. So he wrote OT8 and he's still running BTs. So that has to say something to people. You know, wait, there's no end to BTs, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but the man who created the process to free you from BTs sought to commit suicide to free BTs. And that one fact is such a piece of cognitive dissonance for people that I think Scientologists cannot even get close to that idea and to try to accept it. Because really, that was really OT9 in my view. The real OT9 was L. Ron Hubbard wanting to commit suicide. Suicide is OT9.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, people will believe what they want to believe, and once you're indoctrinated for so many years, you really do believe these things. It's not a matter of, actually, listen, let me just backstep a minute. You know, I said, fuck you to all these people. Honestly, guys, if you're watching this program, I do pity you. You have my sympathy. I know that's low tone, but I'm telling you, I do pity you, and I sympathize with you for being locked down by your own mind. And if there's anything you can do to work up the courage to just walk out the door and say, so long, all of you, and find your way in life, yeah, I'll tell you, you'll achieve happiness. There are plenty of people out here who will give you a hand if you need a hand. And I just wanted to throw that in there because I understand how the trap works. I was in it, and I'll tell you, I was drinking the Kool-Aid, man. I used to recruit people for the Sea Org. I used to sign up people for services. I got out and I found out life can be wonderful. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ron. And I think
it is not a sin to help somebody or help something. And I enjoy doing that, and I enjoy life. And I enjoy doing this. I feel it's my duty to try to enlighten you, to get you out of the trap you're in. And Brian, I'm telling you, you're a very insightful person. I'm glad you accepted my invitation to do this.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you very much. You know, to the people that are listening, to the OSA and to the lurkers, there are a few words that L. Ron Hubbard defined, which I think causes the mind to start getting shut down. L. Ron Hubbard defined the word reasonable and open-minded. He created reasonable and open-minded to be negative things. He created grief to be negative. He created sympathy to be negative. When those human words, those human characteristics are seen in a negative light, you end up becoming a negative person. If sympathy is seen as bad, then you're going to be an asshole. If reasonable is seen as bad, then you're going to be a cult person. If open-minded is considered bad, then you're not going to allow yourself to think your own original thoughts. And
Right.
that's what happens to them.
Yeah.
Happened to me.
Well, it happened to me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand it because I've been down that road and I got off of it. And then there's one other thing I'd like to bring up, and because we're starting to get a little short on time here, and God, I wanted to get into this incredible string band thing, but let's hold it off toward the end. Um, the reason I wrote this book is I actually had my family taken away from me, and this is considered okay by the church to do. It's just okay. We took away his family. What are you going to have for lunch? Forget it. Just Ron denigrated the family unit. And I think you mentioned something about this, and I'd like you to get into that a little bit, Brian.
There was something that Ron wrote called "The GE is a Family Man," and in it,
Hang on. Explain, what is a GE?
Okay, Okay, so Ron had a lot of fancy spiritual concepts that no other spiritual teachers ever talked about. A lot of Ron's stuff was delusion. But the GE is called the genetic entity. Now, Ron postulated that there was this low order of life form that really wasn't a soul, it wasn't a thetan, it wasn't a conscious entity. It was a very low order of life energy that inhabits our bodies, that all it wants to do is make more bodies and make more bodies and make more bodies. So L. Ron Hubbard basically associates this very low order creature, which is make-believe and delusional, with the family, because he says that the reason that we have this very strong urge for families comes from this lower, and he calls it psychotic. He says the genetic entity is a psychotic entity. It's crazy. Psychotic means crazy. So L. Ron Hubbard is teaching his students that the urge for family comes from this crazy, low, make-believe ghost that inhabits your brain, inhabits your body. Now, L. Ron Hubbard's words get applied. And when I wrote this article, Laura DeCrescendo, I think that's her name, who sued Scientology for a forced abortion.
Right.
She commented on my article and she said, "Thank you, Brian, for posting that. This was the exact article that they showed me to inspire me to abort my child."
Wow.
And then a few other people chimed in and said the same thing. So the genetic entity, the GE is a family man, which is in the book History of Man. That idea leads to the denigration of families. And L. Ron Hubbard says, families are bad groups. That's what he says.
I do remember that.
But Thetans like to join a Thetan group or a spiritual group. So here's what Ron is saying here. And I think maybe he was conscious of this manipulation. So here, what he does is he takes the sacredness out of the family loving connections between mothers, fathers, all the entire family. He says these are bad groups that are inspired by this low psychotic genetic entity. But Thetans like to belong to Thetan groups. And what does he mean by that? What's a Thetan group for L. Ron Hubbard? Scientology. So he puts down the family unit. And so now what happens is that bonding experience between family members starts getting chopped up because now Mr. Infallible, malignant narcissist L. Ron Hubbard is teaching us that the family is a bad group and Scientology is a good group. And so what happens is the family bonding, which is a natural instinct of human being, doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. How can it go away? What happens is it gets focused on L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. So that's why it's so easy for them all to just go, oh, this is just my meat body daughter from one lifetime. Oh, I don't care about my meat body daughter for one lifetime. And like your son, at some point in time, your son didn't call you dad anymore. Remember, you get that story. It was like,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, when I was in the international base, she called me Ron.
because he probably at some point, studied this and studied a lot of the things from L. Ron Hubbard, where he denigrates the family unit as an aberration,
Yeah.
as something that gets in the way of saving the planet. And so your son is a good student of L. Ron Hubbard. He's just a little bit better than we would like him to be. It's sad, Ron. It's really sad. It's horrible. It's evil. It's evil.
Yes, I do agree. And boy, I hate to have to do this. I think, Sean, we're up against the clock, aren't we?
Yep.
Okay, listen, Brian, we're running into a little time constraint here on the studio, but there are several other things I wanted to bring up, and that was about Ron being a hypnotist, and there was another one about Antichrist and Lucifer, interesting subjects. But mainly what I wanted to bring up was the story about the incredible string band and whatever happened to Licky McKechnie. And actually, her name was Licky McKechnie Lambert. You were married to her, right?
I was.
Which is a hell of a story, but we're going to have to shove this off. But with your willingness, I'd love to have you come back. How about it, Brian?
I would love to, Ron.
Yeah. Okay, buddy. Well, let me tell you something. This was very educational and very enlightening as far as I'm concerned. And I think as far as everybody who watches it is going to be concerned, because you're a very insightful person. A little business here. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you find these shows enlightening and you'd like to contribute to it, and I would appreciate it very much. I don't care if it's $2 or $5 or $100 or $10, whatever. If you could do that, it would very much please me, because we're on our own dime, and we could stand some help, obviously. And if you don't want to do it, that's fine too. But I'm still going to do this no matter what. Now, I think Sean is trying to get my attention.
Yep. Yeah, you just had 2 super chats. You had one from Red Scare for $10. He says, Happy New Year, Ron.
Happy New Year to you.
And then you had another one for $3, Charmaine Stankowitz. Happy New Year, Ron. So,
and what was the first person's name?
First person was Red Scare.
Russ?
Red Scare. Like, the red, the color red.
Oh, okay. A little dull. Okay, Red Fear and Charmaine.
And Charmaine.
You're lovely people. They said Happy New Year?
Happy New Year, yeah.
And I say Happy New Year to you, and have a very prosperous and healthy New Year. And I appreciate you calling in. That's very nice of you. And I invite this. And listen, while you're at it, get some other people to start watching this program. Get some more subscribers. I'd love it. Let's get the show up to about 10 times as big as it is now. And we're going to start creating some nice effects and hopefully stop a lot of people from getting into this trap called Scientology.
Yeah, and then we got the Garage Magazine article that you did. Should be coming out next week. They're produced by Vice, the media.
Did they hear that out there?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, as Sean mentioned, I was interviewed for Garage Magazine. That's going to be out tomorrow. That's produced by Vice, which apparently is some big internet company. And you all know that I'm digitally challenged, okay? It's something that I wasn't raised in a digital era. I was raised in an analog era. I knew all the multiplication tables up to 12 times 12, And these days, you just press a button, it'll give you the square root of the largest number you ever heard. Now, so much for this program, and it's been wonderful talking to you, Brian, and I welcome you back, and let's do it. Meanwhile, I wish the best of you out there, the best that life has to offer. God bless all of you. I'm Ron Miscavige. This is Life After Scientology. See you on the next episode. Bye-bye now.